The glass and steel skyscrapers reflected the afternoon sun as Ricardo Menezes hurried down the steps of Pharmatech International's headquarters. His tailored Italian suit showed not a single wrinkle, despite a busy day of meetings. He glanced at his wristwatch, a stainless steel Rolex Submariner he had bought for himself when he got the promotion to regional manager, and frowned. He was almost late for the video conference with the European headquarters. He raised his hand to hail a taxi, and when a yellow vehicle pulled up to the curb, Ricardo got in, slamming the door with unnecessary force. He didn't even glance at the driver as he pulled his cell phone from his inside jacket pocket. 1578 Paulista Avenue. Hurry, I have a meeting in 20 minutes, he ordered curtly before answering a call. Ricardo Menezes. Yes, I'm on my way. No, we won't accept less than a 35% margin. If they don't agree, we can look for another supplier. The taxi entered the flow of traffic as Ricardo spoke louder and louder, as if the volume of his voice could convey authority through the phone. We're talking about a 17 million contract, Peter. 17 million. They're not going to back out because of 2 percentage points. Well, then tell them to reschedule the meeting. My time is too valuable to waste on indecision. He hung up and immediately began checking email, typing short, to-the-point replies, as the taxi wound through the dense late-afternoon traffic. It wasn't, until the vehicle took an unexpected turn that Ricardo looked up from the screen. Where are you going? I said Paulista Avenue. The driver, a gentleman with gray hair and a calm demeanor, adjusted the rearview mirror to make eye contact with the passenger. There's a detour on this street, sir. Construction is underway on the main avenue. I'm taking the alternative route. Ricardo looked out the window and saw the detour signs and orange cones signaling the roadblock ahead. Even so, irritation had already taken over him. And couldn't you have warned me before? Now we're going to get stuck in all the traffic on the parallel highway. Excuse me, sir. The diversion was installed today. We'll only arrive about 3 minutes later. The driver's calm response seemed to infuriate Ricardo even more. He glanced at his watch again, as if those few minutes could ruin his meticulously built career. 3 minutes? 3 minutes? Do you have any idea what 3 minutes in my day is? That's 17,000 Ries, that's what it is. Do you really know how to drive, or did you buy your license on some street corner? The driver's face remained impassive in the rearview mirror, though his eyes, tired and deep, registered every word. They were eyes that had seen much of life. Disappointments, struggles, victories. He simply adjusted the position of his hands on the steering wheel, his calloused fingers revealing years of hard work, and continued driving in silence. I'm going to report you to the company. What's your registration number? It should be clearly visible on the dashboard. It's mandatory. Where is it? The driver didn't respond immediately, simply maneuvering skillfully through traffic until he found a gap that allowed them to move forward more quickly. When he finally spoke, his voice remained calm. My name is Arthur Gomes, sir. Registration number 001. Feel free to file any complaint you deem necessary. Ricardo huffed, returning his attention to his phone, muttering something about incompetence and declining service standards. When they finally reached their destination, he practically threw the fare, including a few extra bills, into the front seat. Keep the change. Next time, get to know the streets of your city better. Arthur looked at the notes and, to Ricardo's surprise, handed back the excess amount. The fare is exactly that amount, sir. I don't accept tips for just doing my job. Ricardo hesitated for a second, disconcerted by the unexpected dignity, but his irritation quickly regained control. He snatched the money back with a brusque gesture and slammed the door, not looking back as he entered the office building. What Ricardo didn't imagine was that brief encounter, that explosion of arrogance that for him was nothing more than another moment of frustration in a busy day, would be the catalyst for a profound transformation in the next 7 months of his life. 3 days later, Ricardo sat in his office on the 20th floor of Pharmatech's corporate building. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, a constant reminder of how far he had come at 38, the youngest regional manager in the company's history. On the wall behind his desk, framed in dark wood, hung his bachelor's degree in business administration and his MBA from a prestigious American university, along with certificates of recognition for meeting sales targets and expanding the regional market. Ana Luisa, his 29-year-old assistant, knocked lightly on the glass door before entering. Tall, with brown hair always impeccably tied in a bun, she was almost as ambitious as Ricardo and learned from him every technique, every strategy, every calculated move to advance her career. "The presentation files for the Japanese investors are ready," she announced, placing a stack of documents on the table. "And I've scheduled the meetings with the shipping companies you requested. We have 4 confirmed options for tomorrow and the day after." Ricardo nodded, leafing through the reports with methodical attention. "We need this urban logistics data to support expansion. The Japanese are meticulous and will question every projection. Which companies have you managed to get?" "Transurban, Express Mobility, Quick Connection, and..." She consulted her tablet. "Transport Logistica, the largest in the region." Ricardo frowned, trying to remember if he knew that last one. Transpose? Never heard of it. It's a traditional company, starting with a small fleet of taxis 30 years ago, and now dominates 40% of the corporate transportation and urban logistics market. It's very discreet in the media, but extremely efficient according to references. "Interesting. I want everyone's financial reports before the meetings. They are already included in the folders, sir." Ricardo allowed himself a slight smile of approval, the kind of rare recognition that Ana Luisa secretly collected. "Good job." When she left, Ricardo turned his attention to the presentation. Pharmatech's expansion in the region depended on flawless logistics for drug distribution. A contract with the right company could mean not only substantial savings, but also his long-awaited promotion to executive director at the age of 39. The air conditioning hummed softly, maintaining the perfect temperature as he worked late, alone on the nearly empty floor. There was no one waiting for him at home. His penthouse apartment was as impersonal as it was comfortable, professionally decorated to impress, not to welcome. His marriage to Mariana had ended 2 years earlier, when she finally gave up competing with spreadsheets and reports for her husband's attention. "The company won't hug you when you're sick, Ricardo," were his last words before leaving with the twins, Gabriel and Luciana, then 13. Words he had pushed to the back of his mind, as had the rare calls to the children he now barely knew. Deep down, a nagging feeling grew, that emptiness, that no professional achievement could fill. But Ricardo was an expert at ignoring it, filling every minute with work, goals, numbers, results. The following afternoon, the Pharmatech driver dropped Ricardo off in front of a modern but understated office building, home to Transport Logistica's headquarters. Unlike the other companies he had visited that day, there were no flashy logos or ostentatious decorations. Only a simple geometric symbol in brushed metal identified the company. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, welcomed him as if she were expecting an old friend. "Mr. Menezes, welcome to Transport. Please make yourself at home while I announce your arrival." As he waited, Ricardo glanced around the space. Clean, functional, unfussy, but with an aura of quiet efficiency. On the walls, several framed photographs showed the company's evolution, from a small fleet of taxis to complex urban logistics operations. One photograph in particular caught his eye. It showed a gray-haired man cutting the ribbon at the opening of an operations center. Something about that face seemed strangely familiar. Ricardo moved closer to get a better look and felt a chill run down his spine. It was the taxi driver, the same man he had humiliated 3 days earlier. His eyes darted to other photos, the same man accepting awards, shaking hands with dignitaries, speaking at a lectern during what appeared to be the city's annual entrepreneurship fair. In each image, the calm, dignified demeanor was unmistakable. "Mr. Menezes," the receptionist's voice brought him back to reality. "Mr. Gomez will see you now. He makes a point of meeting all potential important partners personally." Ricardo felt his blood freeze in his veins. Mr. Gomes. Arthur Gomes, the driver who had given him his registration number. 001, the founder and owner of the company. The man he had treated as incompetent, threatened to report, and to whom he had thrown money as if he were a common servant. For a moment, he considered making it an emergency and leaving immediately, but the meeting was crucial for the investor presentation. He had no choice. Following the receptionist down the hallway, Ricardo desperately tried to formulate some explanation, some apology that wouldn't sound pathetic or opportunistic. But when the meeting room door opened, revealing Arthur Gomez sitting at the head of a solid wood table, all words fled his mind. "Mr. Menezes," Arthur stood, extending his hand with a cordial smile, as if they had never met before. "It's a pleasure to welcome you. I've heard impressive things about your work at Pharmatech." Ricardo shook the outstretched hand. feeling the same calluses he'd noticed on the driver's grip on the steering wheel. His own hand was slightly damp. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Gomes," he managed to reply, his voice hoarser than usual. "Thank you for seeing me." To their astonishment, Arthur conducted the meeting with impeccable professionalism, without any mention of the taxi incident. He presented detailed data on the fleet, logistics capacity, tracking systems, and route optimization strategies. He asked precise questions about Pharmatech's needs, demonstrating surprising knowledge of the pharmaceutical industry. Throughout the meeting, however, Ricardo felt uncomfortably exposed under Arthur's watchful eye. There was no overt hostility or resentment, but something more subtle, a silent assessment, as if his every response, his every gesture, were being carefully catalogued. By the time the meeting ended, the preliminary terms of a potential contract had already been outlined, and judging by the numbers, Transport offered by far the best proposal of all the companies Ricardo had visited. Technically, the meeting had been an absolute success. Emotionally, he was devastated. "I'll walk you out," Arthur offered, standing up. In the elevator, finally alone, Ricardo could no longer contain himself. "Mr. Gomes, I have to say, that day in the taxi, I didn't know." Arthur raised his hand slightly, gently interrupting him. "Don't worry about that now, Mr. Menezes. We all have difficult days." The answer, in its dignified simplicity, was more destabilizing than any reprimand. Richard felt infantilized, exposed in his pettiness. When the elevator reached the ground floor, he barely managed to stammer out a thank you before stepping out into the fresh air, feeling suffocated by a shame he hadn't experienced since childhood, when his father criticized him mercilessly for less than perfect grades. Back at the office, Ricardo couldn't concentrate for the rest of the day. The words in the report he was trying to read jumbled before his eyes. Why hadn't this man confronted him? Why had he pretended it never happened? And even more disturbing, why did this bother him so much? Ana Luisa noticed a change in his behavior in the following days. Ricardo, normally focused and decisive, seemed distant, lost in thought. His usual irritability gave way to moments of reflective silence, interrupted by even more intense outbursts of impatience. "Is everything okay, sir?" she asked after he canceled an important meeting without explanation. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" The answer came too sharply, even by his standards. Ana Luisa backed down discreetly, but the worry persisted. If Ricardo began to fail, what would happen to her own carefully planned path to follow in his footsteps? 2 weeks later, while Ricardo was reviewing the formal proposal sent by Transport Logistica, his phone rang. It was Arthur Gomez in person. "Mr. Menezes, I hope I'm not interrupting. I'd like to invite you to tour our field operations before we finalize the contract. I believe understanding the physical and human infrastructure behind the numbers can be valuable to our partnership." Ricardo hesitated. The idea of spending more time with Arthur, carrying the weight of that disastrous first impression, was uncomfortable. But refusing could appear to be a lack of interest in the contract, which, objectively, was the best option for Pharmatech. "Of course, Mr. Gomes. When would be convenient? How about tomorrow? It'll be a full day, starting at our main garage at 7 a.m. I suggest comfortable clothing. We'll be visiting maintenance centers, driver bases, and if you don't mind, sharing some routes with our professionals." The prospect of trading his controlled corporate environment for garages full of mechanics and drivers made Ricardo swallow hard. Still, he agreed. The next morning, Ricardo arrived at Transport's main garage wearing what he considered casual, branded chinos, a polo shirt, and Italian leather shoes that, while inappropriate for the environment, were the least formal he owned. The contrast with the employees' practical uniforms couldn't be more stark. Arthur, wearing a simple button-down shirt with the company logo and jeans, greeted him with the same calm smile as always. "Welcome to the heart of Transport, Mr. Menezes. This is where it all begins every day." The smell of reheated coffee mixed with motor oil and rubber tires was completely foreign to Ricardo, who had spent his life in offices with purified air and gourmet coffees served on fine china. As they toured the facility, Ricardo noticed something disturbing. Many of the drivers and mechanics looked at him with silent recognition, exchanging glances as he passed. Some even whispered. Arthur seemed unaware, or chose to ignore it, as he explained the preventative maintenance systems and safety protocols with evident pride. During lunch in the staff cafeteria, simple but surprisingly tasty food, Ricardo finally understood. Arthur wasn't the only one who knew him. Several of the drivers present had transported Ricardo at some point, and apparently the recent incident was no exception to their usual behavior. "You're the quarterly report guy, right?" one of the fleet supervisors asked during a casual conversation. "My brother works in finance at Pharmatech. He says you're a genius with numbers, but..." He trailed off, realizing he was about to cross a line. "But," Ricardo insisted, feeling a knot in his stomach. The man shrugged uncomfortably. "Nothing. They just say you're picky." Ricardo's careful choice of word didn't fool him. He knew exactly what it meant. Demanding, difficult, unbearable, arrogant. That afternoon, when Arthur suggested they accompany a driver on his route, Ricardo felt simultaneously apprehensive and resigned. He climbed into the passenger seat while Arthur sat next to the driver, a middle-aged man named Roberto. 15 years with the company, Arthur introduced him with evident pride. He knows every street in this city like the back of his hand. Along the way, Arthur encouraged Roberto to talk about his work, and Ricardo found himself hearing stories about difficult clients, challenging weather conditions, and the constant struggle to maintain professionalism even when treated with disrespect. "Last week I had an executive yell at me for 10 minutes because the GPS suggested a route through congestion," Roberto said, apparently unaware of Ricardo's shrinking back seat. "I just said, 'Yes, sir,' and kept driving. What else was I supposed to do?" "How do you deal with this?" Ricardo asked, surprising himself with his genuine interest. "With people who treat you like this?" Roberto reflected for a moment, his eyes fixed on the road. "I think about my children. I work to give them what I never had. A quality education. My oldest daughter is finishing her engineering degree, did you know? The first in the family. When someone treats me badly, I remember that I'm building something bigger than my momentary pride." The silence that followed weighed on Ricardo like a tacit accusation. He had built an impressive career, but what else was he building? What legacy would he leave beyond? Spreadsheets and contracts? The car stopped suddenly, interrupting his thoughts. Thin smoke began to pour from the hood. "Radiator problems," Roberto diagnosed after a quick inspection. "Nothing serious, but we'll need assistance." Arthur was already on the phone requesting a tow truck when he said, "We're at least 40 minutes from downtown with this traffic. We'll have to wait." To Ricardo's horror, they were parked in a remote part of the city, far from the skyscrapers and upscale restaurants he frequented. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange as they waited on the sidewalk, watching the street activity. "Do you guys want some coffee? There's a great bakery around the corner," Roberto offered. Arthur readily accepted, but Ricardo hesitated. "Go ahead," Arthur encouraged. "Roberto knows all the best local spots, doesn't he?" Sitting at a simple formica table, sipping surprisingly good coffee, Ricardo found himself engaged in the most genuine conversation he'd had in months, perhaps years. Roberto spoke about his family with overflowing pride, showing photos of his 3 children on his cell phone. Arthur occasionally added comments, revealing he knew personal details about his employees' lives, birthdays, family challenges, dreams. "Mr. Gomes helped me when my wife needed expensive surgery," Roberto said. "Not with money, although the company's health plan is excellent, but with flexible hours so I could be present for appointments and recovery. That's priceless." Ricardo nodded, suddenly aware that he knew absolutely nothing about the personal lives of his subordinates. Not even Ana Luisa, who spent more time with him than anyone else. When they finally returned to the city center, it was already night. Arthur offered Ricardo a ride home, but he declined, preferring solitude to process everything he had experienced. In his penthouse apartment, Ricardo poured himself an expensive whiskey and gazed out at the illuminated city through the panoramic windows. The lights of cars formed rivers of movement below, each carrying people with their own stories, challenges, and dreams. People he had systematically ignored for years, seeing them merely as tools or obstacles on his path to success. The phone vibrated, a message from Ana Luisa. Transpor's operations manager called. He said that Mr. Gomes would like to schedule 2 more technical visits before finalizing the contract. Ricardo sighed, mentally preparing himself for further exposure to Arthur Gomes's silent scrutiny. But to his surprise, he found he didn't mind as much as he'd expected. There was something strangely liberating about being seen clearly, in all his imperfection. Over the following weeks, Ricardo underwent an intense immersion process in the world of transport. He visited distribution centers, participated in driver training sessions, and even helped plan optimized routes for urgent pharmaceutical deliveries. Gradually, he began to understand Arthur's vision for the company, not just an efficient transportation operation, but a community of people treated with dignity and respect, offering the same treatment to customers. During one of these visits, Ricardo accidentally overheard a conversation between two managers who were unaware he was nearby. "The boss is testing him," one of them said. "He does this with all the potential big partners, puts them to the test. This one is doing better than I expected," replied the other. "After that taxi thing, I thought he wouldn't make it past the first week." Ricardo froze, feeling suddenly exposed. So it wasn't a coincidence. Every situation, every visit, every experience had been carefully orchestrated by Arthur to test his character, to see if he was worthy of a long-term partnership. The feeling of being constantly evaluated was simultaneously humiliating and enlightening. For the first time, Ricardo questioned himself, who he really was when he wasn't being measured by quarterly goals. And performance indicators? Who was Ricardo Menezes beyond the ruthless executive everyone feared and respected? The intense summer gave way to a milder autumn. The trees on the avenues Ricardo walked daily began to change color, their golden leaves falling onto the sidewalks. He began to notice details of the city he had previously completely ignored: the flower vendor on the corner who always smiled, the elderly shoeshine boy who told stories to his customers, the woman who walked 3 different dogs every morning. One afternoon, after a particularly productive meeting about real-time tracking systems, Arthur invited Ricardo for coffee in his personal office, a surprisingly modest space for someone in his position. "We're almost ready to end our partnership, Mr. Menezes," Arthur began, pouring coffee into simple ceramic cups. "But there's one last matter I need to discuss." Ricardo nodded, bracing himself for technical or financial details. "As you may know, Transport has built its reputation not only on logistical efficiency, but also on the way we conduct relationships. We value long-term partnerships based on mutual trust and shared values." Arthur paused, watching Ricardo with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances. "The contract we are negotiating is technically impeccable and economically advantageous for both companies. However, my final approval is conditional on something that is not stated in the clauses or terms." "What?" asked Ricardo, genuinely curious. "Real growth as a human being," Arthur replied simply. "I've watched you these past few weeks, Mr. Menezes. I've seen potential, intelligence, creativity, but I've also seen a man who has built his entire identity around professional success at the expense of authentic human connections." The words hit Ricardo like a punch to the gut. No one had ever been so direct with him, so ruthlessly honest. "I am willing to recommend this partnership to the board," Arthur continued, "if I am convinced that you are capable of leading not only with technical brilliance, but with genuine humanity." Ricardo felt a mixture of indignation and deep discomfort. How dare someone place personal conditions on a commercial contract? At the same time, an inner voice questioned, was it really so absurd to value character over numbers? "With all due respect, Mr. Gomes, that's unusual. I don't know how to quantify or demonstrate something so subjective." Arthur smiled, a gentle smile that reached his eyes. "Exactly, Mr. Menezes. Not everything that matters can be quantified. That is perhaps the most valuable lesson I can offer." Ricardo left that meeting deeply disturbed. The contract with Transport was essential to Pharmatech's expansion and his long-awaited promotion to executive director. But how could he demonstrate real growth as a human being when he had spent decades optimizing only for objective metrics and tangible results? The following week, an unexpected email arrived in Ricardo's inbox. Sender, Mariana Menezes, his ex-wife. "Ricardo, we need to talk about the twins. Luciana is struggling with anxiety at school, and Gabrielle is failing 3 classes. I know you're busy, but they need their father right now. Please call when you can." Ricardo glanced at his watch. It was 10 in the morning on a Wednesday, a time when he would normally be in the middle of financial analysis or strategic meetings. Without much thought, he picked up the phone and called. "Mariana." The surprise in her voice was evident. "Ricardo? Is everything okay? You never call at this hour." "I'm fine. I just, got your email. What's going on with the kids?" The conversation that followed lasted almost an hour. Ricardo listened, truly listened, for the first time in a long time. Luciana, always a perfectionist like her father, was having test anxiety attacks, terrified of failing. Gabriel, more rebellious, was clearly seeking attention through his low grades and defiant behavior. "They miss you, Ricardo," Mariana concluded, her voice carrying not only concern for her children, but also an old hurt not yet fully healed. "It's not enough to pay the child support on time. They need your presence, your time, your attention." "I know," he replied, surprising both Mariana and himself with the sincerity in his voice. "Can I see them this weekend? Maybe take them to lunch, talk." The silence on the other end of the line communicated Mariana's shock. "Of course," she finally replied. "They would be very happy." When he hung up, Ricardo stared at the computer screen where spreadsheets and graphs awaited his attention. For the first time, the numbers seemed empty, unable to fill the void he felt when he thought of his children growing up without truly knowing him. The traditional entrepreneurship fair was approaching, an annual event that celebrated the local economy with exhibitions, lectures, and cultural activities for 3 weeks. Arthur Gomes was a central figure, known for mentoring young entrepreneurs and offering scholarships through the foundation linked to Transport. To Ricardo's surprise, Arthur invited him to join the organizing committee, specifically the team responsible for free transportation logistics for small merchants and artisans who didn't have their own means to transport their products to the event location. "I thought your organizational skills would be valuable," Arthur explained. "Plus, meeting these small business owners can offer interesting insights into the local economy your business aims to serve." Ricardo accepted, intrigued by the challenge so different from his usual routine. Instead of leading executives in air-conditioned meeting rooms, he found himself coordinating volunteer drivers and creating efficient routes to serve artisans, small farmers, and micro-entrepreneurs from all corners of the region. One such encounter would change his perspective forever. Donna Amelia, a 72-year-old woman who produced delicate embroidery using techniques passed down through 4 generations of women in her family, lived in a remote neighborhood that was difficult to access. Ricardo personally arranged her transportation, ensuring that her fragile works would arrive intact at the exhibition pavilion. When she arrived and saw her carefully prepared space to display the embroidery, Donna Amelia held Ricardo's hands in hers, hands deformed by arthritis but still precise in their craftsmanship, and thanked him with tears in her eyes. "Without you, I wouldn't be here," she said simply. "My grandson tried to help me, but he works 2 jobs. This means a lot to me." Ricardo felt something stir in his long, petrified chest. The genuine gratitude in that woman's eyes stirred an emotion no annual bonus or corporate recognition had ever evoked. Working side by side with people from all walks of life, drivers, artisans, small business owners, Ricardo began to develop a new form of leadership. Instead of imposing his will through intimidation, he discovered the power of genuine collaboration, mutual respect, and active listening. To his surprise, his ideas were frequently challenged by people he would previously have considered beneath his station, and often they were right. One day, while helping organize the fair's lecture schedule, Ricardo received a notification on his phone, a tag and a photo posted on social media. It was a picture of him helping set up the booth of a family farming cooperative, smiling relaxedly, without the tense, controlled expression he normally displayed. The message that accompanied the dialing caught him completely off guard. "I saw you helping at the fair. Who are you and what did you do to my father?" Luciana, her 15-year-old daughter who had barely spoken to her in months. With trembling fingers, Ricardo replied, "It's still me, just learning some new things." The answer came almost immediately. "Like what?" Ricardo thought before typing. "Like things. That should be obvious. Like listening to people. Valuing more than just numbers. That kind of thing." 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared and disappeared several times, as if Luciana were carefully choosing her words. Finally, "Cool. Gabriel and I were thinking, maybe we could go to the fair this weekend. If you're there." Ricardo felt a lump in his throat. "I will be. I'd love to show you around." That weekend with her children at the fair was like rediscovering people she'd lost, not just because of the time that had passed, but because of her own previous inability to truly see them beyond her expectations. Luciana revealed herself to be an articulate and sensitive young woman, passionate about photography and social causes. Gabriel, beneath the facade of teenage rebellion, showed a genuine interest in technology and innovative solutions presented at the booths. "You look different, Dad," Gabriel commented as they sampled typical foods in one of the fair's food courts. I don't know, idiot," suggested Ricardo, surprising his children with his good-natured self-criticism. They laughed, and in that simple moment of genuine connection, Ricardo felt something corporate success had never provided, a sense of belonging, of purpose that went beyond goals and numbers. The traditional mid-year festival, a regional celebration that combined Thanksgiving for the harvest with community fellowship, took place during the second week of the Entrepreneurship Fair. It was an ancient tradition, kept alive for generations, where the community gathered to prepare and share meals in huge pots over open-air fires. To Ricardo's surprise, Arthur invited him not as a VIP guest, but as a volunteer. "I want you to experience the party as it really is," he explained. "Not from afar, observing, but actively participating." That's how Ricardo, the executive who rarely entered his own kitchen, found himself chopping vegetables, stirring steaming cauldrons, and serving meals prepared according to ancestral recipes. The smell of burning wood, the heat of the fire, the sweat of physical labor, the lively conversations with people of all ages and social classes, all created a sensory experience that transported him outside his usual comfort zone. In a moment of pause, Ricardo found Arthur sitting alone, watching the celebrations with a serene smile. "Can I join you?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Arthur gestured to the bench next to him. For a few minutes, they simply watched the hustle and bustle, families gathered, children running, and elderly people telling stories. "You know, Mr. Menezes," Arthur finally broke the silence, "when I started as a taxi driver over 30 years ago, I learned more about people in 1 year than in my entire previous life. People show their true character when they're in a taxi: relaxed, tense, kind, cruel, generous, mean." He paused, taking a sip of herbal tea. "That's why, even after I grew up and became an entrepreneur, I never completely left the wheel. At least once a week I go out driving. It keeps me grounded, reminds me that every driver I hire deserves dignity and respect." Ricardo nodded, beginning to understand. "When you got into my taxi that day," Arthur continued, "it wasn't a coincidence. I already knew who you were." Ricardo turned around, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Pharmatech contacted Transport weeks ago about a possible logistics partnership. As I always do with potential key partners, I researched you. Your reputation in the market is impressive and worrying." He turned to look Ricardo directly in the eyes. "Brilliant," everyone said. "Visionary, ruthless, but also arrogant, impatient, unable to work with people he considered beneath him. I decided I needed to see for myself." Ricardo felt his face burn with shame as he realized the extent of the strategy. "So that detour, it was real," Arthur assured him. "But I could have warned you sooner. I chose not to observe your reaction to the inconvenience. And you confirmed exactly what I feared." Ricardo looked down, unable to hold Arthur's calm gaze. "So why did you continue working with me? Why didn't you just reject the partnership?" "Because I saw potential, Mr. Menezes. I don't choose partners based solely on numbers. I choose them based on who they can become." Arthur smiled gently. "Besides, I believe in second chances. We all deserve the opportunity to grow beyond our mistakes." Those words, spoken on a simple wooden bench, far from the polished meeting rooms, struck Ricardo with transformative power. Someone had seen him at his worst: his arrogance, his impatience, his inability to treat with dignity those he considered inferior, and yet still believed in his ability to change. "Thank you," Ricardo said simply, the word carrying more weight and sincerity than any elaborate corporate speech he had ever delivered. Arthur just nodded, understanding the depth of that gratitude. Winter arrived, bringing heavy rains that tested the city's entire transportation infrastructure. Ricardo, now deeply involved in both Transport's commercial contract and social projects, spent nights coordinating emergency routes and ensuring safe conditions for drivers in flood-affected areas. Decisions his former self would have considered irrational, like prioritizing the rescue of stranded residents in peripheral areas over lucrative commercial deliveries, now seemed self-evidently correct. The cold logic of numbers and margins had given way to a more holistic understanding of success and responsibility. In his office at Pharmatech, the transformation was visible. Ricardo had removed some of the glass walls, creating a more accessible environment. Photographs from the entrepreneurship fair and community celebrations shared space with corporate certificates. And, most significantly, he now knew the names of his employees' children, asked about their families, and showed genuine interest in their lives outside of work. Ana Luisa observed this change with fascination and a hint of concern. The new Ricardo was undoubtedly a better leader, more humane and approachable. But would he still achieve the same impressive results that had characterized him before? The answer came on a rainy Wednesday morning when Pharmatech's global CEO personally called Ricardo. The board was impressed with last quarter's results, he announced, especially with the innovative partnership with Transport, which combines logistics efficiency with social responsibility. We would like to offer you the position of managing director for the Americas. It was the promotion Richard had obsessively pursued for years, the pinnacle of his career, the validation of all his sacrifices. But as the CEO detailed the impressive compensation package and responsibilities of the position, Ricardo felt an unexpected hesitation. "I want to think about it," he replied, surprising both the CEO and himself. "I greatly appreciate the offer, but I need to consider some personal factors." When he hung up, he found Ana Luisa staring at him in disbelief. "Did you just ask for time to consider the position you always wanted? Who are you, and what have you done with Ricardo Menezes?" The question, an unconscious echo of his daughter's words months earlier, made Ricardo smile. "I'm still me. I'm just learning that success can mean different things than I imagined." In the following days, Ricardo reflected deeply on what he truly wanted. The executive position would mean relocating to the United States, abandoning the community work he had begun, reconnecting with his children, and the new perspective on life he was developing. After a week of reflection, Ricardo requested a meeting with the CEO to present his response and an unexpected counter-proposal. "I accept the executive directorship," he announced, "with some conditions. First, I want to remain based here, visiting other countries as needed, but maintaining roots in the community where we are building valuable partnerships. Second, I propose the creation of a genuine corporate social responsibility program, not just for marketing, but with a measurable impact on the communities where we operate." To their surprise, the CEO not only accepted the terms, but demonstrated genuine enthusiasm for the innovative approach that combined commercial excellence with social impact. When spring finally arrived, bringing new flowers to the avenue's flower beds and the gentle scent of jasmine to the city's parks, Ricardo maintained a habit that surprised his fellow executives. At least once a week, he would forgo the company car and driver and use regular taxis to get around. It wasn't penance or nostalgia. It was a constant reminder, as Arthur had taught, that every person he encountered, regardless of their position or role, carried a complete story and deserved dignity and respect. On one of those mornings in the taxi, Ricardo recognized the driver, Roberto, the same one he had met during his visits to Transport, with whom he had talked about family while they waited for the tow truck that transformative afternoon. "How is your daughter? Has she graduated in engineering yet?" Ricardo asked, genuinely interested. Roberto's smile in the rearview mirror communicated surprise and appreciation that Ricardo had remembered that personal detail. "You graduated with honors. You're already working at a multinational company. You won't believe it, but it's in the pharmaceutical industry. Who knows, maybe one day you'll meet professionally." Ricardo smiled. "It would be an honor. People like your daughter, with determination and a strong family base, are exactly what we need in leadership positions." When he arrived at the Pharmatech building, Ricardo paid the exact fare and added, "Thank you, Roberto. Not just for today's race, but for that conversation months ago. It made more of a difference than you know." As he walked up to his office, Ricardo reflected on the journey of the past 7 months. He had lost much of what he once considered essential: absolute control, the armor of professional cool, the calculated distance from ordinary people. But he had gained something infinitely more valuable: authenticity, genuine connections, a success that went beyond quarterly metrics. At the end of the day, as he left to meet his children for dinner, a weekly appointment that was now sacred in his diary, Ricardo stopped for a moment to observe the city's hustle and bustle. The same yellow taxis continued to circulate, transporting people to unknown destinations. But now, finally, he could see beyond the vehicles, seeing the people behind the wheel and inside them, each with their own story, their own dreams, their own inalienable dignity. His cell phone vibrated with a message from Arthur. "Foundation board meeting tomorrow. Your presence is important." Ricardo smiled, responding affirmatively. The transformation continued, not as a journey with a final destination, but as a daily commitment to be a little better, a little more human, a little more connected than the day before. And as he walked into the restaurant where Luciana and Gabriel were already waiting for him, Ricardo finally understood the most valuable lesson Arthur had taught him. True success wasn't about position, salary, or power, but about the ability to positively influence the lives of those around. You, starting with a taxi driver treated with dignity, through his own rediscovered children, and eventually reaching entire communities benefiting from more humane and conscious business decisions.